town of the good, the bad, and the weird. You either live by the gun, or you die by the sword.
Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to take you on a journey to a land where croissants pave the roads. Wine flows through every person's blood, even the children.
So, France.
Yes, France. We're going to review a French movie today.
And the gas station that I stopped at on the way here, unfortunately, did not sell red wine. So I got the next best thing. Which flavor of fake-ass LaCroix do you want? Which is not French. I believe they're from Minnesota.
I think so.
But they sound French, and so for today, that's good enough.
What's the other one?
I don't... Mure Pepino.
I don't know. I can't pronounce this. Cherry lime. Alright, I'll do this one. Alright. So, the film we are actually reviewing is The Triplets of Belleville.
Yes.
And this was one of your suggestions, so I'll let you start.
It was. I accidentally saw this movie quite a long time ago. My mom is really into things like the Oscars and awards ceremonies in general. And this one came up under the list of potential best animated movies. And I hadn't seen it, which is very unusual. I usually get through all of the animated movies of the year. Mm-hmm. And this one flew under the radar somehow for me. So I picked it back up, and I have since shown it to every single person that I can, and all of their responses have been roughly the same.
Yeah. I mean, your husband's seen it quite a few, but everyone, when we had dinner, was just like, interesting.
It's a weird, kooky movie.
It's cute and it's charming, though.
It is. The basis of the story is we're in France, supposedly Paris.
Starts off just outside Paris.
Yes. And it sets the tone really nicely, especially for being an animated film. This was a really smart move. It sets the background of some of the characters by going back in time and animating them in the time period that they would have been in. So 1930s, kind of that rubber hose style.
Yeah, very early Disney Mickey Mouse and the
silly symphonies sort of feel.
Okay.
And the opening sequence I have now seen, I think, over a handful of times, and I had always known that the caricatures, which is how the entire movie is animated, is very caricature-esque. I always knew those people were probably real people, but, like, I didn't really know who they were. And now that I've done the research, I really wish I had done the research before I had seen it, because it made those people so much more important.
Well, from my understanding from one of the featurettes, the director mentioned that they were based around people in his life, whether intentionally or unintentionally.
Yes. So the first scene is setting up kind of the vaudeville-esque feel of theater back in the day. Mm-hmm. And it's showing that off with the oversized women with the very small, skinny guys as their husband or their partner, mm-hmm. being the audience, and then a very wide and strange assortment of talents all being presented by the triplets.
Yeah.
Who are singers. And so example being one of the ones that every time I get people to watch it that they go, oh no.
Yes.
Is the first act that comes out, which is an African-American lady wearing nothing but a banana skirt.
And then the men devolve into monkeys.
Yes.
Which was actually a theory at the time that people could genetically devolve back down to whatever ape they came from.
Yeah, and it also kind of is having this jab at guys, especially these upper-class gentlemen, being nothing more than a monkey or an ape, and being very hostile and rude to this actress, who I now know that's Josephine Baker, and that banana costume is actually something she wore and performed in.
Oh.
Yes. If you'd like to Google it, there's some pretty wonderful photos. None of them are very rude photos, because they're all from the 1930s. But the caricature is so spot on that I didn't realize until after I had Googled her how how much detail they had put into this. And it was really kind of fun to spend my afternoon Googling these random people that I was now learning about. So her being one of them, from what I researched and now are trying to learn more about her, she was a renowned dancer and activist. She was originally from St. Louis, Missouri, I believe, and then moved to France.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, that's her.
There's a banana skirt.
There's the banana skirt. Like, she's a stunningly beautiful woman.
Oh, yeah.
She was one of the first African-American stars in a motion picture in 1927. She went on to inspire so much more than I had realized, especially in acting and in fashion and in the world that she was in at the time. And unfortunately, just due to time and where I grew up with education, I had no idea who she was. Same thing with the guitarist who they show briefly. I believe that's supposed to be Django Reinhardt. Pardon if I say anyone's name wrong. Like, I'm from the Midwest, nothing makes sense here.
I don't speak French either, so...
Nope. But apparently he was one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, really bringing an emphasis to guitar and jazz. The conductor is someone important who I should have known. The tap dancer was someone important that I should have known.
You should know this one from architecture. Fred Astaire.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, like, all of these people completely blew right over my head the first, 4 times I watched this movie.
And I never thought of it either. I mean, to be fair, the cartoon style, they feel like people, but they're also different enough that it doesn't...
Yes. The style is very unique and very beautiful to look at, but it does have that same feel as if you were to go to the state fair and get your caricature done, where your teeth are too big, your ears are too big, your nose is too big, your eyes are even too big. Like, you are so exaggerated, but at the same time, it holds the same sort of, it's somewhere between that and, those political cartoons you see in, classy-ish newspapers. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Maybe
yeah. Well, and that was actually part of the director's intention. Because of the style of animation, he wanted to have features that were easily recognizable from a distance. That's why the G-men that show up later are boxy.
Yes.
They're squares.
They are squares. There's a lot of animation play on words in this one that it does keep your attention even during the scenes that are supposed to be slow, which is, I think, a really nice touch, especially for someone who's easily distracted. Yeah.
Well, and when we were watching it, when partway through the movie, I the moment the ship appeared.
Yes.
Pulled out some of my favorite album artwork from Dance Gavin Dance.
Yeah.
Very similar art style.
Yes, that very exaggerated. It's kind of grungy. It's kind of, but everything's got that clean line to it. Everything, the whole thing is beautifully animated, and even the parts where they do use CG to fill in bits, like the ocean.
Yes.
It's done in such a way that unless you knew that was CG and you were specifically looking for it, you gloss right over it.
Well, and even, because I'm a little newer to French animation, my only experience is this Triplets of Belleville, April in the Extraordinary World.
Yeah.
And some little ones I found recently.
Yeah. I also wasn't super familiar with it, even though I tried to watch this movie fairly close to when it came out in 2003. And now that I'm revisiting it, it kind of has sparked the interest in finding some of these sort of things, not even just to match the art style or the storytelling, but just because, it's a whole genre I hadn't even considered before.
No, and, I mean, we see, especially in, animation, 3D's become such a big staple in it. This one in particular, you could tell that there were 3D parts.
Yeah.
Definitely. But they blended very well together. I don't think they blended as seamlessly as the director had wanted them to.
I don't think the seamlessness has aged the same as the hand-drawn bits.
It's like going and rewatching the back to 1998 Godzilla, where, like,
Yes.
at the time it was stunning.
Yes.
But now, as we've come accustomed to CGI'd everything.
Yeah. And if you're in the animation world, you've already developed that eye for the CG stuff, specifically for me, so that I can decide what not to watch most of the time. But it is still done in such a way that it's not distracting enough from the movie for you to turn it off by any means.
No. It's really well done. I mean, they
It is.
used a 3D style that meshed very well with it.
And it's also it was also drawn in such a way that you can rewatch this movie multiple times and be getting little bits of the story every time you watched it. Especially because this one is an almost silent movie. There's a line at the beginning and a line at the end, and they're the same line. They bookend it, which is a nice storytelling touch. But other than a couple of bits here or there, like a lady yelling, "No hamburger for you," for the most part, there's no talking. Which then means that you have to be attentive enough to both catch names, story points, relationship points.
Well, not even names, too. Like, some of them, they don't even tell their names. Like, when I was watching the commentary from the director and the one of the artists, they kept saying Champion, and I'm like, who the hell is Champion? And then in that scene when he comes back from the bike crash, he's wearing a cape that says Champion on the back.
Yeah.
That is your only indication that is his name. And that this is... He's not the main character, but
he's the main story point.
Yes. And even his grandmother.
Yes.
You actually only see her name once in the movie.
Same thing with the dog, too. You only see the dog's name once on his food bowl. And we had a discussion when that popped up, because I think one of us mentioned, oh, the dog's name's Bruno. And then we all went, well, maybe the dog's name isn't Bruno. Maybe that's just the bowl has the word Bruno on it.
Yeah.
But...
It's a very nice little way of saying, hey, here's the characters' names.
Yes. It also was nice touches because, especially having a group watching it was fun, because you get the sense that the elderly lady, Susa, is that how you say it?
I have no clue.
I'm not really sure. But the elderly woman, the main character, you kind of get the sense that maybe she's not the mother of Champion. And if you're paying attention, you see bits of newspaper clippings in the background that one of our friends pointed out and was like, no, she's clearly his grandmother. There's his parents in the photo. Yeah.
Which, honestly, the opening of this film, after rewatching it, it's very well done. Because it starts off with them watching television.
Yes.
And that's how we're introduced to the triplets. They were starlets of the time.
Yep.
But it's also the way the director gets you to recognize something later down the line in the movie. Because they start off with a pan from above down.
Yes.
And then it proceeds through the different ages as they get older. And each time they choose a different color palette.
Yes.
And then when they finally get to, I would say, really the start of our story, once he's older, they've gone through
once he gets to bicycling age.
Which is great because they don't use flashbacks in this movie.
No.
It's all a continuous timeline.
Yeah, and at the very end of the movie, they do hint that maybe the story was a movie inside of a movie. But the way they did it was such a nice, subtle touch that at no point did you feel like you were in flashback hell.
No. And... like, there's little bits here and there when I was rewatching it, you know, when they have the train set and it runs over the dog. And
Poor Bruno.
Yeah. He's so fat.
He is very fat.
He is actually based off a dog the director saw once. That was so fat.
So fat.
But when she's flipping through the newspaper, she sees there's a hole missing. And I missed this the first time watching it. She looks through it and she looks at Champion, and he just kind of has a shifty...
like, oh no, who did that? What?
And then she opens up the booklet later and finds that he loves cycling.
Yeah. And it is also... There's not really, or at least not a blaringly obvious moral to the story, or it's not challenging the world that it built in any way.
No.
But it is a nice growth story of a grandmother trying to bond with her grandson. And she found the one thing, like she went through a bunch of different things, and she found the one thing that he loved, and so she became expert in it so that she could be there with him for it.
Be his support.
Be his coach. Also, that whistle, though.
Oh.
One reviewer I was reading through said that it was like wired to her jaw. Just not inaccurate. Like, Champion, when they develop him, he starts off as a cute kind of big-nosed, chubby kid, and then when they age him, they make him this long, tall, lanky guy with giant legs. And she doesn't change at all.
And a long freaking nose.
Yes.
You cannot miss the nose. We start off seeing him as an adult from a viewpoint of his nose.
Yes, his nose could have had a GoPro placed upon it. But the fact that she doesn't change her appearance, I think is kind of an interesting point, because he's clearly trained so hard that he's changed his whole physique and his entire, like, he's grown so tall, he's so muscular now, he's so in shape, and she is still a very short, one leg shorter than the other little old lady, and she is keeping up with him on his tricycle while blowing a whistle at him the whole time.
Yeah.
This lady is amazing. She should join the Tour de France.
Yeah, no, it was adorable. I mean,
it really was. It was also kind of an interesting, like, you got your sad pity at the beginning because the poor dog is home alone for a good majority of the day, it seems like, which is probably why he is so fat with teeny tiny little legs. But at the same time, having him be there was not just so you could feel sorry for this dog and to explain why they're gone so much. Later on, you get these weird dream sequences from the dog's point of view, which I wouldn't say progress the story, but explain the story a little bit deeper for you, which was a nice way to do it as opposed to having one of the people doing these weird dream sequences.
Or doing a flashback of some kind.
Yeah, having the dog have the weird dreams kind of makes sense, because, I mean, what does a dog dream about? I don't know, maybe it is riding a train and having other people bark at them. Sure, why not?
Yeah. I mean, and like they really do a good job of setting up what their life is like up until the Tour de France.
Yes, and because the beginning is so slow, it makes the kidnap scene so much more impactful, even though the kidnap scene isn't a fast-paced kidnap.
No.
They just open the door, and he's so tired, and he believes that they're there to help him, that he just walks in, and it takes, like, it feels like 5 minutes of movie time to get through the kidnapping scene, which is a long kidnapping scene for a movie. But because the buildup was there, it felt like you had that sense of danger the entire 5 minutes.
Yeah, and like, you kind of know what's happening, because at that point, you don't see any of the French mafia. And the moment they appear, they're this big block of They're a wall. Yeah, because they meld together.
Yes, and they're always in sets of two. You don't really see their eyes. They have squinty, shifty, or even closed eyes, was how some people described it, was their eyes were closed so that they weren't seeing what they were doing. And the other part, real quick before we completely leave the Tour de France scene. So there's an accordion player during the Tour de France who sits on top of a moving van and plays the accordion apparently the entire way of the Tour de France.
Oh, jeez.
Apparently this was a real person. Apparently this is based off of Yvette Horner, who, and according to her, this was fairly accurate to her real life experience of doing this. Someone commented to her the bugs in the teeth, because at the end she looks very travel worn. She has bugs all in her face.
Oh, that lady. Okay.
Yes, the one on top of the van just going to town with that one song.
Yeah, with like the very
big
rabbity teeth.
Yeah, and that's supposed to be a caricature of this woman who, according to one interview I found of her, she had seen this movie and was like, yeah, that's not too far off of how it was.
And see, that's the thing, is like, this film is steeped with such recognizable characters, but also at the same time they're so they're different enough from their real life counterparts, and I feel that despite it being very cartoony, it had a element of realism to it.
It did, and it also had enough background bits that were jabbing in some way to both be humorous, but also to drive a point of some kind home. Example being, there's quite a lot of wine poked at in the movie. It's directed towards all of the French characters. And then all of the supposed American characters are all shown with hamburgers and being incredibly oversized.
Yes, I mean, it opens up with us entering Belleville with an obese Statue of Liberty with a cheeseburger.
Which someone pointed out was quite humorous, especially since there's a sister version of the statue still hanging out in France. So, but everything was done in such a way that no one was given special permission to not be jabbed at. Everybody got a jab. Everybody was, like, put on display because... And it worked because the art style is on the verge of grotesque.
Yeah.
So, like, at no point did it feel like anyone was getting any special permission, and at no point did it feel like it was stepping a line.
No.
That's a hard thing to do.
I mean, we have those jokes about there's plenty of jokes about the French, like, so for my research, I read this book, The Frenchman and the Seven Deadly Sins by Fernando Diaz Palea.
Sure.
He's a Spaniard who analyzes the French people through the Seven Deadly Sins.
Ah.
He also has one on the Americans, which I'd like to read at some point. But there's a old saying in it that I really like in it. An ass only drinks when it's thirsty, but an ass only drinks water.
Yes.
And I mean that goes back to, like, they're making fun of themselves in it too. Like,
yes,
they understand.
definitely.
Yes, we are a little snobby. We drink all this wine, which,
I mean, good for you guys.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie.
Sounds good to me.
I like wine.
Yeah.
Can't complain.
Exactly.
But yeah, even, like, part of the reason it feels so, like, what well done is Belleville isn't just America, though.
No.
It's a combination of America, France, and Montreal, from what they said. Which is
especially since I saw it so many times without doing any research whatsoever on it, because that's just the lazy person that I am. When I watched it the first time, I missed enough of the cues about America that I thought perhaps it was supposed to be Paris. And then I watched it again, and I thought, no, this has definitely got to be America. It's definitely got to be New York. Mm-hmm. And then I watched it again. I was like, no, there's no way this is New York. There's just stuff that's not.
Like, when we were watching, we mentioned there's 5 Flatiron buildings. But you do see city streets like that in older cities and countries where...
Yes.
5 roads come together for some reason.
Because why not? Yeah, so it does a very nice job visually of blending them so much that it kind of leaves it up to the viewer to pick which one of those cities they're identifying with the most while they're watching it. Mm-hmm. Which lets them kind of write their own jokes and narratives, because all of them are there. It's just which ones are you going to see and notice that time that you're watching it.
Yes. And, like, so, on their way over to Belleville, or we keep going between Belleville and Belleville. The directors pronounce it Belleville, and you've talked about it as Belleville for a long time.
I think the reason I call it Belleville is because where we live very close to a different town called
Bella Vista. And it's spelled
spelled very similar.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure even, like, if we were to go over there with Bella Vista, it'd probably still not be pronounced correctly, but you know what? That's how we pronounce it down here. So, buckle up. That's just how it is.
But on their way over, they're riding on ships that are very reminiscent of the Titanic, too.
Yes. Except for dear sweet grandmother, who steals a paddle boat with her last coin, her last franc she uses to rent a paddle boat, and then her and the dog paddle boat across what I assume is the Atlantic, or maybe the Pacific. It's not made clear because I don't know which direction we're going.
It could also be the English Channel.
Yeah, I have no idea, but whatever waterway she's crossing, she's doing so in a rented paddle boat with her dog in a storm, and she is keeping up with a stream, with a ship liner. Like, girl, damn, son.
She does end up letting the dog paddle.
Yes, also, I am a little concerned on why the dog is fed caramels.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
But at the same time...
But she used... So there's a part in this movie, but even right before they go on the right before they get on the boat, before they realize the son's been kidnapped. She gives the dog a caramel, and we're like, okay. And then the next scene, you see them rolling in. The dog is the wheel.
She has used the caramel to glue the dog's mouth to the car because the tire broke, and this does no damage to the dog whatsoever. Bruno's fine.
Bruno's a tank.
So, and I mean, but at the same time, it does explain a lot of Bruno's diet, because Bruno also is seen to only be fed caramels and disgusting gray slop that the grandson is eating, but he doesn't eat very much. He sits on a scale and waits until he re-hits this perfect weight that he needs to, and then the rest goes to Bruno, and there are fish bones in it.
I will say, I know the director mentioned what's in it. Which,
yeah. I'm curious because the gray stuff looks like a really nasty version of the gray stuff from Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, they're completely different.
I'm sure they are, because if I'm not mistaken, the gray stuff from Beauty and the Beast is probably something delicious, like Oreos and whipped cream.
It's like some type of dessert.
Yeah.
Like, it's some old French dessert. Because I looked it up, too, because I was trying to find a recipe, because I wanted to feed this to your husband. But it's actually sardines and mashed potatoes with fish bones.
See, the fish bone, up until the fish bones, that sounded like something I would have made in college.
Yeah.
But I don't try to add fish bones to my food. But you know what? You do you. If you like fish bones, I guess just don't choke on them.
It was the director or graphic artist or one of the art directors who mentioned it looked like something they would eat when they were younger.
I mean, good on you, I guess. I mean, he's not dead, so it's got to be fine.
It explains Bruno's mass, though.
It does.
He is being fed potatoes and sardines.
Yes, and also not just a little bit. Like, they are... The grandson is shown being given a full heaping plate of this just glue. Gray fish paste glue. And eating only what seems like maybe a quarter of it. And then the rest is given to the dog. And it doesn't just be given to the dog. It flops off the plate in the most disgusting manner possible.
Which, honestly, that whole scene is one of the best scenes in it, and it's one of the ones where like the CGI blends in very well.
It does.
The scale is CGI.
Yeah, and you wouldn't recognize it.
Yeah. But also, like, when I was watching that, because by that point in the film, Paris has expanded out.
It has.
Into them, and their house has been knocked over a little bit.
It's leaning and been propped up with 2x4s.
And so all of their pictures in the background are at an angle.
Yes.
And she's rolling stuff up the house, and it's a really it's charming to say, hey, they've just been encompassed by the city. These people who live in their own little world are now part of this bigger microcosm.
Yes, and at no point, and it's a very interesting part of the overarching story, because again, the world is built up to be this world where there are nice things, there are great things, and the characters we meet, both the grandmother, the grandson, and then the triplets, live in just not the greatest of situations. The grandmother's house at one point was beautiful and nice and had a beautiful yard in the countryside, and it is now underneath a subway, leaning up. Everything's dirty now, everything's gray, everything seems to always be raining, but at no point does the grandmother make a scene about wanting to move. In fact, it's not even part of the narrative at all.
No.
In fact, for all we know, she loves it still.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I really liked, because it leaves the viewer to decide if the growth of the city coming into the countryside is a problem or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really the movie touches on heavy political issues.
It definitely does.
But in a very subtle way.
Yes.
Like, just little jabs and then just lets it go.
Yeah. And at no point does it try to make a point or an opinion on any of them. It just points them out and leaves them in the story, because that's how the director and the art directors saw the world at the time.
Mm-hmm.
A good example is once she does get over to America, she runs into the triplets in one of the best jazz songs I have heard in a movie in a really long time.
I don't even keep track of that.
I'm sure you don't, but it was an amazing piece of music that is integrated into the movie in a really nice way, where you've got this wonderful catchy song, that normally you'd want to either put at the very end in the credits or maybe somewhere in the beginning when everything's not started. No, they stick it right in the middle. It is a plot point.
Well, I mean, it is in the beginning.
Yes, it is.
It's them.
It's their song.
Yeah.
But it's now been redone to be this, like, street version of itself. But not. It's still a classical version of jazz. But they've turned from being classic jazz singers
to stomp.
Yeah, to stomp.
Are they even still around?
I'm sure they are. I saw them in college, so they've got to be still going, right?
I saw them on VHS in like elementary school.
I don't know if it's the same people per
no,
se.
I know.
But...
the whole group, like theatrical act.
Yes.
I didn't get it in school, and I still don't like.
Yeah, and I ran into the word for the type of music the triplets are now creating, where they're now using everyday household objects to create music, and you get the first little taste of that with their introduction to Madame Souza, or whatever her name is. But...
Which, that's also a good point, too. Like, her being Madame Souza is... Yeah. That's a very French thing to call Monsieur or Madame.
Exactly. And it also is such a nice detail, because the triplets are still dressing in nice coats with fur. One of them has what appears to be a dead cat looped around her neck.
I think it was a fox.
Maybe it's a fox. I'm not sure. It was just very dead.
But like it's supposed to somewhat appear nice, but it's also gotten grungy and
it's definitely old, but they're still dressing to the nines. They live in a building that is shown to be very grungy. It is full of ladies of questionable pursuits.
Mickey Mouse poop.
Yes, there is in fact an actual poop in the toilet at one point.
I had to pause the movie to show you guys that.
And it is undoubtedly in the shape of Mickey Mouse himself.
Which is another like little subtle jab.
And it's only in there for like a tenth of a second, it feels like. But it's there. And
me with a bunch of wine in me is like, oh yes.
And so they live in this building and their apartment is literally at window level with the subway train or the tram or whatever they're calling it in that city. And their apartment is still homey. They still have all of their old instruments hung beautifully on the wall where they're kept and displayed. All of the things that they now consider instruments, like the refrigerator, the vacuum cleaner, the newspaper, those are kept pristine and kept in nice condition. They don't use them for anything, but like they clearly still are doing what they absolutely love. Yeah. Even though they are no longer famous, they are no longer this great sensation. They're just three girls all sharing a one-bedroom apartment in the grungiest part of town.
Which they don't even... That's another thing they don't explain is like, yeah, they're sharing an apartment, but are they sisters? Are they really close friends? Or are they friends that are close enough to be sisters?
They don't really explain it. They just call them the triplets.
Yeah.
And that was probably just their stage name. We don't even have individual names for them at any point, as far as I could tell.
I think... I remember the director mentioning, I think they do have specific names, but he always referred to them as the triplets.
Because they're never seen apart.
No.
With the exception of one scene in which one triplet goes out to go get dinner for them. And she goes out with a stool strapped to her butt.
Which, awesome idea. I mean, why drag it with you when you're gonna sit down on it anyways?
She's just got it belted right to her butt. She walks out with an umbrella, a net, and an old style hand grenade. One of the ones with the big long handle that you can just like really chuck out there. And we were watching it, and it takes a while for her to get to the water, get sat down, get the umbrella up, and in that time one of our friends goes, "Is she fishing with a grenade?" And we were like, "What? No, she's just fishing." And then immediately this giant explosion happens. He's like, "Yeah, that's how you do it." And right before that, one of our friends had noticed that a lot of the frogs were like missing an eye, missing some arms. One of them was real wonky walking, and she was like, "Is this radioactive frogs?" No, she's just been doing this like probably every week for a couple of years now, and so the frog population is just missing limbs.
Well, for who knows how long either, because From my understandings, from the first time we see the triplets to when we see them again, it's been 30 years.
Yeah. And we can only assume that when we saw them the first time, that was the height of their career.
Could have been right before the Great Depression on top of that, which
is kind of what it alludes to in the movie, especially because it starts off, even though it's that black and white style, it's clearly a much nicer world, a much richer world.
Yeah.
And then we immediately run into this grunge and this lack of wealth among the people who we see on the street, the everyday folk.
And that's an interesting thing, too, going from, like, what their instruments are, where originally they're the instrument, they're kind of the thing that carries the act, and now it's become, like, they get to their house, all the instruments are decrepit, very similar to their clothes, but they still keep doing what they do with just everyday objects of the people. Yes.
And it's also, in the blink of an eye, and I think a couple people in our group missed it, there's a very quick time change where they show the season flying by.
That was me because I got up to pour more wine.
And so you're briefly expected to understand that Madame Souza, or again, however you say her name, she's been with them a whole year looking for her grandson in this strange foreign world with not one penny to her name. And they don't have another bed for her. They don't even have enough beds for them. They all share one bed, and yet they're so enamored with her and willing to help her that they just let her now live for a whole year on their couch. Mm-hmm. And now, the next time we see her, now she's part of their band. She's developed her skill to play a bicycle wheel.
Yeah, which
fits in with the rest of them really well.
Which, actually, the sounds we're hearing in the movie are from those exact things. Like, they're the guy who created that song, that music
with the whirring noise from the
vacuum cleaner.
Yes,
that's an actual vacuum cleaner. He figured out he could mess with the noise by putting a finger in front of it and playing a vacuum cleaner hose.
The one gal is plucking at the metal racks in the refrigerator. And then Madame Souza comes up with her bent wheel, which throughout the whole movie, this isn't just some talent she learned. Throughout the whole movie, it's established that she has been helping tune her grandson's bike via a tuning fork and tightening the rungs that way, which you can see visually. Like, they don't make any effort to even attempt to draw this wheel a little bit straight. It is wonky as all get out. Mm-hmm. But according to her, it's perfect.
And she can't play the piano worth a damn.
No, oh my god. Nope. That was bad. The other point that's kind of interesting is she spends a whole year there. She then is part of the musical group, and while we're at the musical group, we learn that the building that the triplets have been playing at for who knows how long they've been employed at is the same one that her grandson has been brought to. And at this point, a little bit before too, we see the bicyclists who were kidnapped, with the exception, a little bit, but kind of the exception of her grandson, are slowly becoming to look more like decrepit racehorses.
They look like donkeys to begin with. They're not racehorses, they're donkeys.
Yeah. And her grandson is the only one who maintains any level of poise. The other two, from the get-go, look like they are sucking for oxygen. Mm-hmm. And they don't look good.
To be fair, they're doping them with wine. Which
that part was hilarious.
Yeah. like we were talking about, there's wine everywhere. There's wine on the buildings. Instead of IV bags, they've got wine being pumped directly into their veins.
The mobsters' cars' license plates, all of them say, in I believe French, in wine there is truth.
I remember someone mentioning that, and I didn't pay too much attention to it.
There is wine everywhere the mobsters are, there's a reference to wine.
Right, because they're in the French Wine Association or whatever.
Something like that, which kind of does lead you, if you're going to sit and think about this movie, which is kind of a fun side hobby, to think, well, the building with wine on it, does that mean that that's a mafia building? The cars clearly are all of them with that license plate are definitely a mafia car. Speaking of which, so I know you're not super into cars, but the car that they picked to depict in the movie is a version of a real car.
As is most of the movie.
And again, forgive my pronunciation, as I mostly just read this stuff online. I don't have anyone pronouncing it for me. But I believe it's supposed to be a stretched version of the Citroën 2CV, which was a notoriously bad French car. It had really bad get up and go. It had no traction. It had cornered horribly. And a lot of people thought that it didn't last as long as it should have, which, if you think back through the chase scene with those cars, one of the cars completely crumples and dies because it hit a baby stroller.
Okay,
Granted, the baby was pretty fat.
That explains more about that car scenes. Because, I'm like, why did this car crash into a baby stroller and just stop? That makes more sense now that the car is notoriously bad.
Yes.
So is it like the French Reliant Robin?
I don't think it was as bad as the Reliant Robin. I don't think anything is as bad as the Reliant Robin.
I want a chase scene of Reliant Robins.
You wouldn't get far. It'd have to be in a straight line.
No, exactly. They are in a straight line. One of them takes a curve. You just see them all sliding down the hill.
And granted, as with this whole movie, the car is very characterized. So, it flipping backwards down the hill like a domino brick is clearly very ridiculous, but also a little telling of the crashes that this car got into at one point, which was fun. But can we discuss the thing the cars are chasing?
Oh, yeah.
I have questions on how that moves.
So, to back up a little bit, so they infiltrate the, for people who haven't seen this, they infiltrate the mafia's headquarters.
Which is...
dressed as the spooks.
Yes.
And
which was a great scene because the number of people they were trying to portray was almost double. And instead of doing two different groups, they just did one group with heads on both the front and the back.
And a dog in the middle.
So it's like children in a trench coat stacked on top of each other.
Which, we make that reference a lot. But, part of that is interesting, too, because the triplets are massive.
They are incredibly tall ladies.
Which the director was talking about it in his sketches. His thoughts on them were they were drawn... Their body structure was like that of an African-American NBA player. That was his basis behind them, and hence why they're long and lanky kind of looking.
Yes, and when they're first shown to us, they're depicted much younger. And so, yeah, their noodle arms make sense because of the time period. They're these tall, beautiful women, which makes them more of a presence on stage. And so, just from a characteristic, a caricature sort of stance, having those characteristics for a main beautiful set of three ladies makes sense. And now we've aged them, so now they're just really tall, lanky old women who no longer have noodle arms because it's no longer the 1930s.
Yeah,
they just have very long arms and more scary hands.
Realistic arms.
Yeah.
But so back to how they actually escape from this. So they end up getting found out because the grandma dresses up as the repairman who looks like a mouse, a very caricature.
He even makes squeaks.
Yes, they're adorable.
Even squeaks.
And so they get there, and what's happening is her son was kidnapped along with these two other men to compete in a almost 13 Zametti-esque.
Yeah.
Or is it 23 Zametti? It's, you know which movie I'm talking about. Where they're competing in a Tour de France. And
the bit that shows their progression reminds me very much of the fair things where you squirt water at the target and the racehorse runs along, and whoever magically the thing decides wins. And then they've got the projector screen in front of it where they have filmed the entire Tour de France. And so these three men are just forced to race the Tour de France on stationary bikes over and over and over again, like racehorses or race dogs, for the mafia to then gamble on.
Because, again, with that time progression, we don't know how long they've been doing this. This could be like their 50th version of this race.
It could be. And it was also kind of interesting because, again, it's all underground. It's all... Only mafia people are there, and you see them very clearly because the big, tall guys are definitely the bodyguards. And then you get the much smaller, large nose, long cigarette, eyes closed, droopy bosses who are always accompanied by their bodyguards.
Cleanses his mouth with wine.
So silly. And so all of these mafia bosses are there gambling, and we're brought back to how severe this instance is, because one of the racers falls off of his bicycle and he can't get back up. And for an animated movie, we've spent so much time doing the goofy and the silly, and granted, it's still grotesque, it's still in that kind of what is going on style, but then to see the head bid person just calmly take out a gun and kill the one racer, and everyone then just continues on gambling.
Yeah, which is what made me think of 13 Samedi, because if you haven't seen that movie, that's a fantastic movie. There's a remake that I want to watch that's supposed to be awful. I think it has Ice Cube in it, maybe? No, I think it's 50 Cent. 50 Cent. Yeah, that's
50
who
Cent?
it is.
My favorite actor.
But so anyways, how they escape from this is the grandma sabotages the machine. They're found out. One of the triplets throws a grenade into the crowd after they start trying to pump them full with guns.
A fantastic scene, because it does show off the animation skills very well, because the grandmothers are running around the floor screaming and yelling, magically not getting hit by bullets. And normally when stuff starts speeding up, especially in a chaotic scene like that, you start getting those goofy, weird scenes. We've all seen them from Disney where like somebody's eye's pointing the wrong way, or someone's hand is no longer going the way it's supposed to. And the animation on this one is both silly, but also so clean that you don't feel like you're getting any of those weird jumps.
And so, with that, and it still feels like it works.
Yes.
This device that they're pedaling starts driving away.
And it's not just driving away, it is ripping up the floorboards behind it.
Ripping up the floorboards, driving slow,
at
like
maybe
Austin Powers.
1 mile per hour.
Driving like Austin Powers. And
it's almost as bad as Deadpool on a Zumbini.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like that.
It's so slow. And they're coming up to the wall, and instead of unrealistically getting us to believe that this thing runs over the wall and out, one of the grandmothers pulls out one last grenade and blows up the wall, which for some reason the logic in this world makes work, and they start really slowly getting away down the streets of Belleville.
But back to that car. It's slow at starting up and...
Well, and one of the things that I noticed when I was watching that scene again was the only time that the people riding the bike truly felt like they were in danger, as in the eyes got big, the worry started happening, was when they were going in a straight line, because that was the only point when the mafia could actually shoot at them. And the rest of the time, Grandma just kind of Batmans her arm out, grabs a light pole, and they just kind of rotate around a corner. And unfortunately, the mafia doesn't have the ability to turn, apparently, so they just wreck.
The French Reliant Robin.
It's so bad. I'm sure the car's not really that bad, but the movie makes it appear that bad.
Oh, yeah.
And so they start to get to a point, though, when they're both going uphill and they're in a straight line. And so they're all getting out and pushing. There's a different part in that chase scene where they're all trying to throw things at the mafia to get away. And at the first couple times I watched it, I was just like, yeah, throw things at them. Of course, get away. But the chasing is so slow that it doesn't feel out of place for them to take the extra couple seconds to put emphasis that each one of the ladies throws something of meaning to her. So they throw their hats that they've held onto for all these years. The grandmother, I don't remember what she throws, but they all eventually run out of things to throw at the mafia. And so Grandma just gets out and sticks out her club leg and knocks the car over.
If only she had another caramel, she could have thrown it down and they would have stuck.
Probably. Holy cow, what are those made out of?
But, I mean, it
for the slowest chase scene on the planet, and not even, and I'm including the ones from all of the comedy shows where they spend all of that time pretending that it's the slowest chase scene ever. This one actually was, and it didn't feel wrong.
No, it was very well done.
In fact, the slowness isn't even the part that you notice the first couple times you're watching it. Like, it wasn't until like the 5th time I watched it that I realized, wow, we're only going like maybe max 2 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm. And even then, like, it's well paced. It doesn't feel rushed. It doesn't feel too long.
No, they don't. They don't do the awkward pause where they show how wide the gap is between the two of them, or how truly slowly they are going.
Mm-hmm.
They give you the impression that this is a high-speed chase and that all stakes are here. This is it.
Yeah, and even then, just as we were talking about it, I was thinking about how the movie actually ends, because this is at the very end of the movie.
Yeah.
There's not any real additional story to the end of it. It ends with them driving across a bridge and panning up, which is the opposite of what happens in the beginning, where you pan into Belleville.
Yeah.
So you're leaving Belleville back to the TV, and to the son repeating the line his grandmother said in the very beginning of the film.
And at this is the last point at which they age the characters, and so the grandmother is presumed dead, because now the grandson is a much older man, almost grandpa age himself, and he's watching what happened on his own television in what seems to be the same kitchen that he grew up in.
Yes. Which, it makes you kind of want more to the world.
Yeah, it was a very charming world that I would have been happy to have seen more of.
Mm-hmm.
Like the city that they start in, the supposed Paris, we don't really see anything of it other than the few scenes of them going about their bike route, which we can only assume is on the outside of the town, because that's where they live.
Yeah.
So, like, we don't know what the dynamic is in that version of Paris. We don't know what the neighborhood's like, but it's also vague enough that we do. Mm-hmm. We have a pretty good sense of what's going on, which, while wanting more, doesn't leave me craving it.
No. I mean, it's a good story. It's an entertaining story. It's kind of on that cusp of, like, I completely understand why this movie won Best Animated Film in 2006.
Yeah.
Which, the Academy Award for that, I think?
I'm not sure off the top of my head. I do know that after 2003, because 2003 is nominated for 2 different awards. Best Animation, which it lost to Finding Nemo.
Was it? No, the movie's from 2006.
Is it?
Yeah.
All I know is it lost to Finding Nemo, I think. And then it was also nominated for Best Music. I don't know if it won Best Music or not.
Yeah.
I don't know who it lost to if it did lose.
Yeah. Well, with that, like, it's one of those films that...
Oh, I apologize. It was released in 2003 in France.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So, yeah, and most of my data for, like, release dates is based off IMDb. So.
Yeah, which was all American release dates, as far as I know.
They do show the other release dates, but I did this real quick last night.
Me too.
I got home late. But this film is kind of at that cusp of, like, it's entertainment, but it's also just... It's an art piece, but it's not like a fine art piece, but it's just underneath that cusp.
Last night I spent a lot of time thinking about this, because most movies, especially animated movies, exist to prove a point or to tell a moral or to learn a lesson from, and this one does none of those things.
No.
It just tells a tale.
Which, for me, and I've had this discussion with you and your husband multiple times, it's the Coen Brother films.
Yeah.
They're good stories. They're not life lessons. They're not going to change anything. They're just a story to entertain.
Yep, and this one does that absolutely perfectly.
Mm-hmm. Does it to an art form is what it does. It
really does. This is one of the animated films that puts itself on another level.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, the lack of dialogue makes it highly universal. You can show this to people who don't like animated films, don't like foreign films, don't like reading subtitles, which I found this some dude went on a rant on Amazon, gave a movie 1 star, do not watch, not dubbed. Like,
oh dear sweet sweet child.
He went on this rant about, if they're gonna release the movie over here, They should dub it. And it's like...
Oh, that's just... Sometimes that just makes it so much worse, though.
And it's so expensive, though, too.
It is. But sometimes we do get beautiful bad dubbing.
Oh, yes. Mothra.
Mothra.
Reborn. Not Mothra. Mothra Reborn.
The second one especially.
Oh, yes. But... It's a great movie.
It is. And I also think that because they left the dialogue out... for the most part, the movie presents itself in a very timeless way, where it doesn't matter if this animation style ages. That's the point. Because
you're meant to connect with the characters. It's like in a lot of RPGs with the silent hero or action games where you don't hear them talk because...
You don't need to.
And you're supposed to connect with them because of that. Because you're experiencing the emotions they are without them having to say it.
Yeah, and this movie also does a really good job because it is what it is. It is this art piece. It is this time capsule of two different time periods that were important to a lot of people, which clearly is getting lost because I didn't know who any of these people were.
Yeah.
No one in our group recognized a single caricature.
No.
And these caricatures aren't so off that you would not recognize them.
Even me, who watches old movies all the time, I didn't even recognize Fred Astaire.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, he's a tap dancer. That's one of the dance styles of the time kind of thing.
Exactly. And so by creating this time capsule of these two different time periods and what it was like via this art style, which is both pointing out the good and the bad, but not making a deal of it, it makes this movie seem like even in 10 years, this movie's still going to have the exact same point, the exact same relevance that it did when it came out, because it's not trying to do any of the...
Oh, yeah.
It's just there.
No, and I mean, even then, this movie's set pretty far back from our own time frame.
It really is, but also not far back enough that you don't recognize bits, at least right now.
Yeah.
You definitely, like, the couch that the triplets own looks exactly like my grandmother's couch.
Yeah.
Like, the refrigerator, for those of us who are a little older, will remember that style without the plastic trays. The vacuum cleaner, I think my mom still has one of those laying around somewhere. She might have upgraded at this point, but the bits in it still feel like you've got a link to them. Mm-hmm. But even once that link is broken, like my brother will not remember any of those pieces.
Well,
but he's still going to be able to make the same connection that I did and that my mom, well, maybe not my mom. My mom hated this movie. But the same connection can be made not because of the time, just because of the art that it created.
Well, and we're even seeing that nowadays, like, especially within my own family. Like, I talk about stuff because my youngest brother, I believe when he was first starting to have memories, like, when he could really remember stuff when he was a kid, he had been in Europe for a good chunk of his life at that point. He didn't remember Alaska. And, like, it wasn't that long ago. I think it was a couple of years ago. Christian and I were talking about Tool Time.
Oh, and Tool Time!
We mentioned it to him. He has no memory of Tool Time.
And you know what? Maybe he's better for it.
Oh, Tool Time was great, though. But, like, and that's just kind of the age we live in. Like, yeah. I know, like, even within our own friend group, within people I know, I don't watch a lot of TV shows. There's a lot of TV shows that go by that I will never know, I will never see, and I will never understand because I didn't really grow up with sitcoms. I didn't, like, my sitcoms were, like, Friends and MASH and Seinfeld because that's what AFN had at the time. Yeah.
And this movie makes enough of a point to put in important bits from the time, and they're sprinkled in so that you don't feel like you're stupid for not knowing them, but you're rewarded for bothering to look them up.
A movie that comes to mind for me in recent years was Scorsese's Hugo.
Yeah.
It brings up steampunk, but it also brings up the early days of film with George Méliès.
Yeah, Journey to the Moon.
Yeah.
Which, you know, up until that point, even though I knew of it because I liked film, I had never watched it. And then after seeing that movie, I watched it, I think, 3 different times in 3 different ways. The original, the recolored, and then the remastered.
Yeah.
And each time I watched it, it was a different experience. And then it made certain things that like my grandmother or like my great-grandmother would bring up or that they had in their home, certain pieces started to click and make a little bit more of a connection. I wouldn't say it was like, oh, that was the last piece ever, but like even in this one, when I was doing research for it, I got led down a rabbit hole of example being at the end of the Tour de France, they do show the end to prove that Champion, the grandson, does not make it to the end. He is definitely kidnapped. Those were definitely bad guys.
Yes.
And so the gentleman who won is a caricature of an actual person who did win the Tour de France, I think 5 times. One of the first people to do so. And I had no idea who he was.
Yeah.
And like...
And, I mean, we have all this information available to us now. Like, we don't have enough time in our lifetimes to consume everything.
No. But this piece does such a good point of rewarding you for bothering to look up these people and to just having... And they're people who you want to keep reading about. Mm-hmm. People you want to, like, get through their at least the first couple articles on their Wikipedia page at least. So that you're like, oh, these people existed. Now I want to learn more about them.
Yeah, and I personally went more into I didn't go into a lot of the pop culture or the historical culture. Mm-hmm. I went more into French animation.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that the earliest animated film is a short, 1-minute French film. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's actually a rather bizarre film. I think it was played before another movie, and I can't remember the name of it, but it plays upon this idea that France is this center of culture.
Yes.
And that they're able to take something, a basic idea, and mature it.
Yes.
Except for apparently coffee.
We won't go there. We're not going to go there. But yeah, the film does a beautiful job of bringing in these different elements, telling its tale, and leaving it at that. And so my recommendation for this film is it is, a full bottle of wine out of a giant glass of wine. It is worth a watch. Even if you're not into the bizarre, even if you're not into the weird, it is worth at least watching once, so that way you have it under your belt and potentially it sparks some other chain. Oh yeah. No, I mean, this is a movie I would be more than willing to go back to with a full glass of wine or without. Yep. I mean, definitely if you have a chance, watch this movie. I can't emphasize it enough. As an animated film, it's one of the best I've seen in years. Yeah. And it somehow managed to fly under a lot of people's radar. And that's kind of too bad, because I feel like it would have a beautiful home in the cult world of today. Mm-hmm. But, I don't know, maybe soon. Maybe a lot of people will watch it. Yeah. And it will become a thing. Who knows? I mean, you own it now, and so we can force whoever we want to watch it. Yes, much to my mother's dismay. Well, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. Thanks for watching. Peace.